All right, so are you ready to dive in?
Definitely.
Today we're going deep on the Donald Trump phenomenon.
Should be interesting.
This guy, it's like he reshaped American politics and you can't deny it.
Yeah, for sure.
We're going to go way beyond just like scratching the surface.
Right.
Like, how did this real estate guy from Queens become such a lightning rod?
Right. One of the most polarizing figures ever.
So to really get this, we got to go back to the beginning.
Yeah, you gotta understand, like, his early life,
His whole backstory.
it sets the stage for, like, how he becomes so successful in politics.
Okay, so we always hear about that small loan of $1 million.
Right, from his dad.
But is there more to the story?
Oh, yeah. Way more than that.
So it's not that simple, huh?
No, the self-made thing.
Right.
It needs some context.
Okay, I'm listening.
Think about it. He grows up in a real estate family.
Okay.
His father, Fred Trump, he was a big deal in outer borough housing.
Wait, yeah, I've heard the name.
Shrewd guy. Really knew how to work that world.
So that gave Trump a boost.
Oh, yeah. A huge one. It wasn't just the cash.
Right.
The connections, the knowledge.
He was already in the game.
Exactly. And that's what people miss when they talk about him, like he came from nothing.
Okay, so it's more about using what he had,
Exactly.
leveraging those advantages.
Interesting. So when he jumps into Manhattan real estate, the luxury scene,
That's where it gets really fascinating.
he was building more than buildings.
He was crafting a brand
The Trump brand.
all about opulent success.
The gold, the towers with his name in huge letters.
You can't separate the man from the brand at that point.
It's all intertwined.
And that's where the art of the deal comes in.
His book,
Massive bestseller. It wasn't just a business book.
it was like a cultural moment.
It cemented that image. The master negotiator, larger than life.
Always coming out on top.
But, like, things are never that simple.
Right. There were some bumps in the road.
Let's talk about those bankruptcies.
The casinos.
Atlantic City.
Not exactly a smooth ride.
Yeah, he built this image of winning, but there were real setbacks. And those setbacks are important
Huge part of the story.
because somehow they didn't tarnish his image.
They almost made him stronger.
It's weird, right?
He spun those failures into proof he was a risk taker.
Someone who wasn't afraid to push the limit.
Exactly. And that resonated with people.
So the failures kind of fueled the legend.
It's a paradox, but it's key to understanding his appeal.
Okay, so then we see this shift.
From business to pop culture,
Talk shows, cameos in movies,
even wrestling.
and then The Apprentice.
That was a game changer.
That reality show made him a household name.
It was brilliant, honestly.
It just entertained
It was a calculated move.
to build a specific image.
The tough but fair leader, the guy who gets things done.
No nonsense.
Exactly. And it resonated with millions of viewers.
And looking back, it feels like The Apprentice was laying the groundwork for his political ambitions.
Totally. He was testing the waters, seeing how that leadership image would play on a bigger stage.
So by 2015, when he announced his candidacy,
He was already a national figure.
a celebrity with a huge following,
And he tapped into this well of frustration and anger
it was bubbling under the surface of American politics.
for a while.
And then he gave it a voice.
Let's talk about that campaign.
Yeah.
It was unlike anything we'd ever seen.
The rallies, the social media,
The way he just ignored political norms,
it was wild.
he completely bypassed the traditional gatekeepers
Like the media, the party elites,
and went straight to the voters.
the people who felt ignored and left behind.
Exactly. And that message, make America great again.
So simple but powerful.
And it resonated deeply with a lot of people
The people who felt like the country had lost its way.
who yearned for that perceived era of American dominance.
And he didn't shy away from controversy.
Oh no, he leaned into it.
Said things that would have sunk other candidates.
It's true.
His rhetoric,
Often inflammatory, divisive,
sometimes demonstrably false,
but for his supporters,
is refreshing.
a sign of authenticity, a rejection of political correctness.
Of the so-called elites?
Exactly. He gave voice to a segment of the population who felt unheard.
Even if that voice was angry and resentful.
That's a key point.
Yeah.
And that's why his victory in 2016,
Shocked so many people.
it exposed this deep chasm in American society
His polarization.
that had been simmering for years,
And no one in politics or the media really saw it coming.
where they underestimated it.
So from New York real estate to reality TV to the White House,
It's a wild ride.
Trump's journey is anything but conventional,
And the impact of his presidency is still being debated.
both on politics and on American society as a whole.
A huge impact.
And that's where things get really interesting.
It's about to get wild.
We're going to dive into the key events and policies that defined his time in office in the next part of our deep dive.
Definitely buckle up.
Welcome back. All right, so we were talking about how Trump's win really highlighted this like deep split in America.
Yeah, it totally changed the political landscape. In his time as president, it just made those divisions even bigger.
Okay, so let's get into some of the policies, the big events, that shaped his presidency. Where do you want to start?
Let's talk America first.
Okay. Yeah, that felt like his driving idea.
It was like the lens he saw everything through, both here in the U.S. and on the world stage.
So what did America First actually mean? Like, how did it play out?
Well, the core idea was putting American interests above everything else.
Even like our allies.
Sometimes, yeah, it often meant ditching traditional alliances, global cooperation, that kind of thing.
I see.
Like, look at his trade policies, tariffs on goods from China, and even countries like Canada, the EU.
Oh, yeah, those trade wars.
Big shakeup.
I remember businesses having to scramble prices going up on stuff people buy every day.
It was a risky move, trying to strong-arm other countries into doing what he wanted.
Did it work?
Economists are still debating the long-term effects, but there's no question it caused a ton of disruption and uncertainty.
In the global economy.
For sure.
And internationally, it felt like he was constantly stirring the pot. Pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement, the Iran nuclear deal, those were huge.
He saw those agreements as bad for America.
It holding us back.
Yet constraints on our sovereignty. He wanted to renegotiate everything or just walk away.
To get better deals for America?
Exactly.
Yeah.
He preferred bilateral deals one-on-one where he thought he could have more leverage.
So it was a whole new way of dealing with the world?
It was a huge shift from the way things had been done for decades.
His relationships with our allies, they were often rocky.
This is putting it mildly.
But then he'd be meeting with leaders like Putin and Kim Jong-un.
It was a completely different playbook.
Okay, so back at home, the tax cuts, those were big on his agenda.
A cornerstone of his economic policy.
Everyone was talking about trickle-down economics.
Right, the idea was that if businesses and wealthy individuals paid less in taxes, they'd invest more, create more jobs, and everyone would benefit.
But a lot of people said that just helped the rich get richer.
Well, that's a big part of the debate. Did the benefits really trickle down, or did it just widen the gap between the rich and everyone else?
And what does the data say?
It's complicated. The tax cuts did lead to some economic growth, but the benefits were mostly concentrated at the top. The debate over the long-term effects is still going on.
It's hard to measure those things sometimes.
It really is.
And then there were the Supreme Court appointments, 3 in 1 term. That's got to be significant.
It's huge.
Yeah.
You can't overstate the impact of those appointments on the balance of the court. Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, Barrett, they're all considered conservative justices.
And they're going to be there for a long time.
Their appointments shifted the court to the right, likely for decades to come.
That's a legacy that'll last way beyond his presidency.
Absolutely.
And then there was all the drama, the controversies, the scandals.
Yeah, it felt like every week there was some new bombshell.
His presidency was definitely turbulent.
To say the least. The Mueller investigation, the impeachment inquiry over Ukraine, the constant turnover of staff and cabinet members, it was unlike anything we'd seen in modern American politics.
That's so much chaos.
It was exhausting to keep up with.
And his relationship with the media was, well, let's just say it was explosive.
He was constantly attacking the press, calling them fake news, the enemy and the people.
It was relentless.
And it really damaged public trust in journalism, further dividing the country along partisan lines.
It made it really hard for journalists to do their job.
Absolutely. We were constantly under attack.
And then, of course, January 6th.
The storming of the Capitol, the attempt to overturn the election results.
Such a dark day for American democracy.
It was a culmination of everything that had been building during his presidency, the rhetoric, the misinformation, the erosion of democratic norms.
It had all led to that.
And it was shocking to see that kind of violence erupt in the heart of our government.
It felt like a turning point, like we suddenly realized how fragile our democracy really is.
It was a wake-up call for a lot of people that the guardrails of our system aren't as strong as we thought.
And it makes you wonder what lasting damage was done.
Right. What's the long-term impact of Trump's presidency on American democracy? That's the question we're still grappling with.
So we've covered a lot. America First, trade wars, Supreme Court appointments, January 6th.
There's a lot to process.
It's a complex legacy.
Full of contradictions, unintended consequences.
And we're still living with it today.
We are.
In the final part of our deep dive, we're going to explore the lasting impact of the Trump phenomenon and think about what it tells us about American democracy and the future of global politics. All right, welcome back to the deep dive. So we've been tracing Donald Trump's journey, from businessman to reality TV and then to the presidency.
And we've seen how his policies and his rhetoric, they really shook things up.
Yeah, both in the U.S. and around the world. But I keep thinking about January 6th and what it all means. Like, how do we even begin to understand the impact of all this?
It's a huge question. What does the Trump phenomenon tell us about the future of American democracy? I mean,
It's like we have to face some hard truths about ourselves.
right, about our institutions,
Right.
about how vulnerable they are, and the power of populism. I mean, look at what's happening all over the world.
It felt like during his presidency, the ground was constantly shifting.
Oh, yeah.
Things we always took for granted, they were being questioned, challenged, thrown out,
He really tested the limits of presidential power,
pushed the boundaries of what was acceptable.
and sometimes legal, too. Let's be honest.
His attacks on the media, the courts, even how elections work.
It made people worry about the future of democracy.
Like, what are the rules anymore?
Right, and it felt like his supporters were either right there with him or they just brushed it off.
Like it was part of his act.
Exactly. That's part of his appeal, I think.
So for them, breaking the rules, challenging the system,
That was strength.
showing he was fighting for them.
Against a rigged system.
But isn't that dangerous?
It sets a precedent.
Like, what happens if every leader decides they can ignore the rules?
Well, then you don't have the rule of law anymore.
So this is about more than just Trump.
It's about the future of American democracy. Can our institutions survive these kinds of attacks? Can we heal these divisions?
It feels like they're just getting wider, even now years after he left office.
The country is still deeply polarized.
Like we're two different countries.
Trump might be out of office,
Uh,
but what he unleashed, I mean, the anger, the distrust, it's still here.
It's in our politics and how we see each other.
Exactly.
So what do we do? Is there any way to move forward to fix this?
It's a tough one, but I think first we have to admit there's a problem
Okay.
and understand what's causing it. We need honest conversations about the real issues facing our country.
That sounds good, but how do we even start?
We have to be willing to listen to different points of view without judging or dismissing them.
Easier said than done, right?
It is. It feels like we're all living in our own bubbles.
Getting our news from different places, speaking different languages almost.
Yeah, the media is so fragmented. Social media has created these echo chambers.
Where everyone just hears what they already believe.
It makes it hard to have those nuanced, respectful conversations that a healthy democracy needs.
It's like we've forgotten how to disagree without being nasty.
Yeah, we need to rediscover that ability to engage with people who see things differently,
Not as enemies.
but as fellow citizens trying to figure things out together.
We can't just pretend the Trump years didn't happen.
No.
We have to learn from them, understand why he was so popular, and figure out how to protect our democracy from this happening again.
And that means we all have to get involved.
It's not enough to just complain about politics.
We have to be informed, engaged citizens, participate, hold our leaders accountable, expect more from ourselves and each other.
It's a lot to ask.
It is, but it's worth it.
The Trump era showed us that democracy is fragile.
It needs constant attention and care to survive.
That's something to think about.
It really is.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Donald Trump phenomenon. We hope this conversation got you thinking and maybe even inspired you to keep exploring these issues.
Yeah, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep diving deep. The quest for understanding never really ends.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for listening.